The snowplow blade hit the ground with a metallic scrape at exactly 5:30 in the morning, and I knew before the sun even rose that this would be the day everything changed. I had been clearing my driveway in suburban Denver, Colorado, trying to dig out from the worst blizzard we had seen in 15 years, when Patricia Henderson appeared at the edge of my property line in her bathrobe and designer boots, already holding her phone like a weapon. "Mark Lawson, you are in direct violation of Pinewood Heights HOA regulations," she announced, her voice cutting through the morning air sharper than the wind. Section 12, subsection 4 clearly states that no power equipment may be operated before 7 in the morning on weekdays. I killed the engine on my truck and climbed down, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Patricia, there's 3 feet of snow out here. I need to get to the VA hospital for my appointment at 8. I'm clearing my own driveway." "The rules apply to everyone equally," she said, her perfectly manicured finger already tapping on her phone screen. "That will be a $200 fine for the first offense. If you continue, it will be $500 for the second." I stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, looking at this woman who had made it her life's mission to police every single household in our neighborhood since she became HOA president 2 years ago. I was a 42-year-old veteran who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, and I had dealt with actual life or death situations. But somehow, Patricia Henderson and her clipboard full of arbitrary rules had become the most exhausting battle I had ever fought. "You know what, Patricia? Fine me. I'll pay it. But I'm finishing my driveway because, unlike some people, I actually have somewhere important to be." Her eyes narrowed. "That attitude will cost you, Mark. The board takes defiance very seriously." She walked away, her boots crunching in the snow, and I got back in my truck. The vintage military surplus Dodge I had been restoring for the past 3 years rumbled back to life, and I finished clearing my path. By the time I was done, the sun was starting to peek over the mountains, casting everything in shades of pink and gold that would have been beautiful if I was not so angry. My phone buzzed as I was heading inside to shower. An email from the Pinewood Heights HOA official account. The fine was already in my inbox, along with a passive-aggressive reminder about community standards and the importance of respecting one's neighbors. I forwarded it to my lawyer buddy Tom with a single line. "They're at it again." His response came back within minutes. "Document everything." This is harassment at this point. The thing about Patricia Henderson was that she had not always been this way, or at least I did not think so. When I first moved into Pinewood Heights 5 years ago, fresh out of the military and looking for some stability, the neighborhood had seemed perfect. Quiet streets, good schools nearby for when I eventually had kids, mountain views. The HOA had been fairly hands-off back then, mostly concerned with making sure people mowed their lawns and did not paint their houses neon colors. Then Patricia's husband left her for someone half her age, and she ran for HOA president on a platform of restoring community values. What that actually meant was creating an ever-expanding list of rules that she enforced with the dedication of a medieval inquisitor. In the past 2 years, she had fined old Mr. Chen $3,000 for having the wrong shade of beige on his mailbox post. She had threatened to put a lien on the Garcia family's house because their Christmas decorations stayed up until January 3rd. She had even tried to ban my neighbor's daughter from parking her Honda Civic on the street because it was an eyesore, even though street parking was explicitly allowed in our neighborhood. And now she was coming after me for clearing snow from my own property. I made it to my VA appointment on time, barely. The roads were a mess, and the city plows had not made it out to our area yet. As I sat in the waiting room, scrolling through my phone, I saw that Patricia had posted in the neighborhood Facebook group about entitled residents who think rules don't apply to them. She had not named me specifically, but everyone would know who she meant. By the time I got home that afternoon, there was another notice on my door. This one informed me that I was being fined an additional $300 for operating unapproved commercial equipment on residential property. The snowplow attachment on my truck, which I had installed myself using parts from an old military vehicle, apparently violated some obscure regulation about commercial vehicles in residential driveways. That was when something inside me snapped. I called Tom. How much trouble would I get in if I cleared my driveway whenever I wanted, legally? They can fine you according to their bylaws, but you can contest it. Most judges think HOA noise ordinances are reasonable. Why? Just curious, I said, but I was already formulating a plan. The snow kept coming. Another 8 inches fell that night, then another 6 the following day. The city was completely overwhelmed. Schools closed. Businesses shut down. The governor declared a state of emergency. And Patricia Henderson sent out an email reminding everyone that snow removal equipment was only permitted between 7 in the morning and 7 at night. I watched from my window as my neighbors struggled with inadequate shovels and underpowered snow blowers. The Garcia's teenage son spent 4 hours trying to clear their driveway with a shovel meant for sidewalks. Mrs. Chen, who was in her 70s, hired someone to come clear her driveway, but the guy showed up with a pickup truck that got stuck halfway up her street. And through it all, Patricia's driveway remained mysteriously perfect. I later learned she had hired a company from outside the HOA boundaries to come at 6 in the morning. Apparently the rules about timing did not apply to her. On the 3rd day of the storm, I made a decision. I had a friend from my Army days, Jake Martinez, who ran a military surplus yard about an hour north of Denver. I gave him a call. Jake, you still have that M939 with the plow blade, the 5-ton. Yeah, she's sitting right here. Why? How much would it cost me to borrow her for a day? There was a pause. Mark, what are you planning? Nothing illegal, I just need to clear some snow. The M939 is not exactly a precision instrument. That thing is designed to clear roads in war zones. Perfect, I said. Jake laughed. You know what? For you, no charge. But you have to tell me what happens. And I want pictures. 24 hours later, I was behind the wheel of a genuine military surplus 5-ton truck with an 8-foot plow blade mounted on the front. The thing was massive, olive green, and made a sound like angry thunder when I fired up the diesel engine. It was rated for off-road use in the most extreme conditions imaginable. It had been used to clear mountain passes in Afghanistan. It was absolutely, ridiculously, perfectly excessive for a suburban Denver neighborhood. I pulled out of Jake's yard at 4 in the morning and drove back to Pinewood Heights. The roads were still terrible, but the M939 did not care. It plowed through snow drifts like they were made of foam. By the time I reached my neighborhood, I was grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. The sun was not up yet when I turned onto Maple Ridge Drive, the main street running through Pinewood Heights. I had not slept. I had spent the previous day documenting every single fine Patricia had sent me, every email, every passive-aggressive Facebook post. Tom had helped me compile it into a folder labeled Evidence of Harassment. But first, I was going to clear my driveway. The M939 roared up to my house, and I dropped the plow blade. The sound it made hitting the pavement was like a gunshot, echoing off all the houses around me. I put the truck in gear and started forward, and 3 feet of packed snow basically ceased to exist. The plow blade carved through it like butter, pushing massive walls of white to either side of my driveway. It took me about 90 seconds to clear what had taken me an hour with my regular truck. Lights started coming on in houses around me. I saw curtains twitching. Someone's dog started barking. And then, right on schedule, Patricia Henderson burst out of her house 3 doors down. She was wearing another bathrobe, this one cream-colored and probably worth more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her hair was in rollers, and her face was the color of a fire engine. "Mark Lawson," she screamed over the sound of the diesel engine. "What do you think you are doing?" I leaned out of the cab. "Clearing snow, Patricia. What does it look like?" "That is a military vehicle. You cannot operate that in a residential neighborhood." "Actually," I called back, "I checked with the city. As long as it's registered and insured, which it is, I can drive it on public roads, and my driveway is private property." "It is 5 in the morning. State of emergency," I shouted. Governor suspended non-essential regulations. That includes HOA noise ordinances. It was in the official declaration. Maybe you should read it. I had done my homework. Tom had helped me find that particular clause buried in the emergency declaration text. It was not exactly a blanket suspension of all rules, but it was vague enough that I could make an argument. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "The board will hear about this." "I'm sure they will," I said, and then I put the truck in gear. Here is where I should probably explain that I did not plan what happened next. Not really. I mean, yes, I had borrowed a massive military truck specifically to mess with Patricia. And yes, I knew it would make her furious. But what happened next was more of an improvisation. As I was backing up to make another pass and ensure my driveway was completely clear, I saw Mr. Garcia standing at the end of his driveway, which was still buried under 3 feet of snow. His son was next to him, holding that inadequate shovel, looking exhausted. I stopped the truck and leaned out. "Morning, Mr. Garcia. Need a hand?" His face lit up. "Mark, are you serious? That would be amazing." I pulled the M939 up to his driveway. "Stand back. This thing does not have great precision." The plow blade made short work of the Garcia driveway too. Mr. Garcia was laughing and clapping by the time I was done. His wife came out and waved at me, and their son looked at the truck like it was the coolest thing he had ever seen. "Who else needs help?" I called out. That was the moment everything escalated. Because suddenly, half the neighborhood was coming out of their houses. Mrs. Chen appeared in her doorway, waving frantically. The Johnsons from the corner lot, the Patels, the Rodriguezes, even the young couple who had just moved in last month and whose names I did not know yet. Everyone except Patricia Henderson and her little circle of HOA board members. "You are violating multiple regulations," Patricia shrieked, following along the sidewalk as I moved from house to house. She had put on a coat at some point, but she was still in her bathrobe underneath. "I am documenting all of this. The board will take legal action." "Cool," I said. "I'll add it to the counter lawsuit for harassment." Her face went pale. "What? You heard me. I've been documenting every single interaction we've had for the past 6 months. I've got a lawyer who specializes in HOA abuse cases, and he's very interested in Pinewood Heights, especially the part where you fine people for things you don't fine yourself for. Funny how your driveway is always clear before 7 in the morning, isn't it?" I did not wait for her response. I just moved on to the next house. By 6:30 in the morning, I had cleared 18 driveways. The M939 was a beast, and the neighborhood was starting to look almost normal again. People were coming out with thermoses of coffee and homemade breakfast burritos. Mr. Garcia's wife brought me fresh tortillas and eggs. Mrs. Chen gave me a container of dumplings that were still steaming. It felt like a block party, except it was freezing cold and everyone was wearing snow gear, and Patricia was having a complete meltdown. She had been on her phone the entire time, and I could see her pacing back and forth in front of her house, gesturing wildly. At one point, I saw her husband, well, ex-husband now, drive by slowly in his SUV, look at the scene, and then keep driving with what I swear was a smile on his face. Around 7, an actual Denver police cruiser pulled up. Officer Williams stepped out, looking amused. I recognized her from the community coffee meetings the police department held quarterly. She was good people, former military herself, and she had zero patience for nonsense. "Morning, Mark," she said. "Got a call about a disturbance." "Morning, Officer Williams. Just helping my neighbors clear some snow." She looked at the M939, then at Patricia, who was hurrying over, then back at me. "That's quite a snowplow, borrowed from a friend. All legal, registered, and insured. Want to see the paperwork? I believe you." "Madam," she turned to Patricia, "you called about a noise complaint. He has been operating that monstrosity since 5 in the morning," Patricia said, her voice shaking with rage. "The HOA has clear rules about noise, and he is deliberately violating them to harass me." Officer Williams pulled out her notepad. "State of emergency suspends most local noise ordinances, madam, and HOA regulations don't supersede city or state law." "But the neighborhood charter is a private civil matter," Officer Williams said firmly. "If you have a dispute with Mr. Lawson about HOA rules, you need to take it up through proper legal channels. But there's no criminal matter here. In fact, I'd say Mr. Lawson is providing a valuable community service during an emergency situation." Patricia's face cycled through about 6 different shades of red and purple. "This is not over," she hissed at me. "I'm sure it's not," I said cheerfully. Officer Williams stuck around for a few more minutes, mostly chatting with the neighbors and admiring the M939. She took a picture with it, actually, which she said she was going to send to her old unit. Then she left, giving me a subtle thumbs up as she drove away. I finished clearing the last few driveways on the street by 8 in the morning. By that point, I was exhausted, starving despite all the food people had given me, and pretty sure I had just started a war with Patricia Henderson that was going to get ugly. But I was also pretty satisfied. The neighborhood group chat, which Patricia had muted me from months ago, apparently exploded. I found this out later from Mr. Garcia, who showed me his phone. People were posting pictures of the M939, thanking me, and questioning why the HOA was so focused on fining people instead of helping the community. Someone started a poll about whether Patricia should remain as HOA president. By noon, it was 73% in favor of removing her. That was when things got really interesting. Patricia called an emergency board meeting for that evening. Normally, these meetings required 2 weeks' notice, but she claimed the situation was urgent enough to override normal procedures. The meeting was mandatory for all homeowners, which was unusual, and it was going to be held at the community center at the front of the neighborhood. I showed up at 6 p.m. with Tom, my lawyer. He was a tall guy with prematurely gray hair and the kind of calm demeanor that came from years of dealing with corporate nonsense. He carried a leather briefcase and wore a suit that probably cost more than my truck. "Remember," he said as we walked in, "don't lose your temper. Document everything. Let her dig her own grave." The community center was packed. Every seat was taken and people were standing along the walls. I saw all my neighbors there, the ones whose driveways I had cleared. I also saw Patricia's core supporters, a group of about 6 or 7 middle-aged women who seemed to spend their entire lives finding things to complain about. Patricia was at the front table with the other board members. Wendy Wilson, a thin, blonde woman who always wore too much perfume; Richard Stanton, a retired accountant who looked perpetually confused; and Margaret Foster, who owned 3 rental properties in the neighborhood and mostly cared about property values. "This meeting will come to order," Patricia announced, banging a gavel that seemed ridiculously theatrical. "We are here to address the flagrant violations of community standards that occurred this morning." Mark Lawson deliberately and maliciously violated multiple HOA regulations, including but not limited to noise ordinances, unapproved vehicle operation, and disturbing the peace. Tom stood up. "I'm Tom Edwards, representing Mr. Lawson. I'd like to note for the record that all of those accusations are factually incorrect. My client operated a legally registered vehicle on his own property and public streets during a state of emergency. He violated no laws. This is not a court of law," Patricia snapped. "This is an HOA meeting, and we operate under our own charter, which is still subject to state and federal law," Tom said calmly. "You can't enforce regulations that violate a resident's basic rights." He woke up the entire neighborhood. "Actually," Mr. Garcia stood up, "he helped the entire neighborhood. My family would still be snowed in if not for Mark. Maybe instead of fining him, we should be thanking him." A wave of agreement went through the crowd. People started clapping. Patricia banged her gavel again. "Order. This meeting will have order." Her voice was getting shrill. "The board has already decided on the appropriate penalties. Mark Lawson is fined $5,000 for multiple violations, and his HOA privileges are suspended pending a full hearing." "What privileges?" someone called out. "What does that even mean?" "It means he cannot use community facilities, attend meetings, or vote on HOA matters," Patricia said triumphantly. Tom was writing everything down. "You're aware that's legally unenforceable, right? You can't strip someone of their voting rights without due process." "The charter gives the board emergency powers. The charter doesn't override the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act," Tom interrupted. "I have a copy of it right here if you'd like to review the relevant sections." Patricia's face was doing that purple thing again. "Are you threatening legal action? I'm informing you of the law. What you do with that information is up to you." That was when things got really chaotic. Multiple people started trying to talk at once. Someone made a motion to have a vote of no confidence in Patricia's leadership. Patricia tried to rule it out of order. Someone else pointed out that according to the HOA bylaws, any homeowner could make a motion, and it had to be voted on. The meeting devolved into a shouting match that lasted almost 2 hours. At one point, Wendy Wilson actually burst into tears and ran out of the room. Richard Stanton kept trying to restore order but looked like he wanted to be literally anywhere else. Margaret Foster mostly sat there calculating numbers on a notepad, occasionally muttering about property values. Finally, Tom stood up and simply projected his voice over everyone else's. He had that courtroom presence that commanded attention. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "Either the board withdraws all fines against Mr. Lawson and issues a formal apology, or we file a lawsuit for harassment, selective enforcement, and violation of the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act. I already have documentation of at least 40 incidents where the board, specifically Mrs. Henderson, has enforced rules inconsistently or in a manner designed to harass specific residents." He pulled out a thick folder and set it on the table with a thud. "I have emails, text messages, financial records showing that Mrs. Henderson has used HOA funds to hire private contractors for her own property while fining others for doing the same thing. I have testimony from 17 residents about selective enforcement, and I have photographs showing that Mrs. Henderson herself has violated noise ordinances at least a dozen times in the past year. The room went dead silent. Patricia's face had gone from purple to white. Those are lies. Then you won't mind if we present them in court. Discovery will be fun. We'll get to see all of the HOA's financial records, all of your personal communications regarding HOA business. Everything. Margaret Foster suddenly looked very interested. Wait, what's this about HOA funds being used for personal contractors? I'd be happy to show you, Tom said, pulling out a spreadsheet. Looks like about $12,000 over the past 18 months. All paid to Front Range Property Services, which is owned by Mrs. Henderson's brother-in-law. Services that were billed as emergency common area maintenance, but which seemed to correspond with work done on Mrs. Henderson's personal property. Now everyone was talking at once. Richard Stanton was demanding to see the financial records. Margaret was shouting about embezzlement. Patricia was denying everything, her voice getting higher and more frantic. I just sat there and watched it all unfold. Tom leaned over and whispered, "She's done." "You know that, right?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm starting to see that." The meeting finally ended around 9 o'clock with no resolution, except that an emergency audit of HOA finances would be conducted, and another meeting would be scheduled in 2 weeks. Patricia tried to maintain her composure as she gathered her papers, but I could see her hands shaking. As people filed out, nearly everyone stopped to shake my hand or thank me again for clearing their driveways. Mrs. Chen pressed another container of dumplings into my hands. Mr. Garcia invited me to his daughter's quinceañera in the spring. Even people I had barely spoken to before were suddenly treating me like a hero. Patricia left without speaking to anyone, her core supporters trailing behind her like confused ducklings. "That went well," Tom said as we walked to our cars. "You think she'll back down?" "Not a chance." People like her doubled down, but we've got her cornered now. The financial stuff is bad. If there's actual embezzlement, that's criminal. He was right about Patricia doubling down. Over the next few days, I received 3 more certified letters from the HOA, each one containing new fines and violations. My truck was parked incorrectly. My trash cans were visible from the street. My lawn had dead patches under the snow somehow. Each one went straight to Tom, who was building a case that looked more and more like a slam dunk. But Patricia had one more card to play, and it was worse than I expected. A week after the infamous snowplow incident, I got a call from the City Code Enforcement Office. They wanted to inspect my property for unpermitted modifications and potential safety violations. Someone had filed a complaint claiming I was operating a commercial snow removal business out of my residential property. I did not need 3 guesses to figure out who had filed that complaint. The inspector showed up 2 days later. His name was Dave something, and he looked tired and apologetic before he even got out of his truck. "Look, Mr. Lawson, I'm going to be straight with you. This complaint is obviously retaliatory, and I've seen the whole story on Nextdoor. But I still have to do my job. Mind if I take a look around?" "Go ahead," I said. "I've got nothing to hide." He spent about 30 minutes checking my property. He looked at the snowplow attachment on my truck, verified it was properly mounted and not a safety hazard. He checked my garage to see if I was running any kind of business, which I wasn't. He even measured the height of my fence to make sure it met code requirements. "Everything looks fine," he said finally, filling out paperwork on a tablet. "I'll file a report saying there are no violations." For what it's worth, what you did during the storm was pretty great. My parents live over in Littleton, and nobody helped them clear their driveway. They were stuck for 3 days. "Thanks," I said. "Send them my way next time. I still have the M939 on loan for another week." He laughed. "Your HOA president is going to love that. That's kind of the point." What I did not tell Dave was that I had actually gotten permission from Jake to keep the military truck for the rest of the month. And I had been using it every single day, driving it around the neighborhood, parking it in my driveway where it was impossible to miss. It was completely legal, fully registered with the state, and insured through a specialty military vehicle policy. But it drove Patricia absolutely insane. I would see her peering out her windows at it. She posted in the neighborhood group about aggressive displays of military equipment and intimidation tactics. She tried to get the city to ban military vehicles from residential areas, which went nowhere because there was no legal basis for it. The truck became a symbol. Other neighbors started putting out little American flags. Someone made a joke about needing an M939 owner's manual and left it on my doorstep as a gift. The Johnsons' teenage son asked if he could take pictures with it for his Instagram, and I let him. Meanwhile, Tom was making progress on the legal front. The emergency audit of HOA finances had revealed some seriously questionable activity. The $12,000 to Patricia's brother-in-law's company was just the tip of the iceberg. There were unexplained cash withdrawals, payments to vendors that didn't seem to exist, and a general mess of poor record keeping that suggested either incompetence or deliberate fraud. Margaret Foster, the board member who owned rental properties, turned out to be a forensic accountant in her previous career. Once she started digging into the numbers, she found more problems. A lot more. "This is bad," she told me when she called me one evening. "Like, potentially criminal bad. There's at least $30,000 that I can't account for over the past 2 years. Maybe more." "What are you going to do?" "The board is voting tomorrow night to remove Patricia as president and treasurer. Then we're turning everything over to the police. I wanted to give you a heads up because this is going to get messy." The board met in a closed session the next evening. I was not there, but Mr. Garcia was, representing his block, and he filled me in afterward. Patricia had come in defensive and angry. When confronted with the financial evidence, she first tried to deny everything, then claimed it was all accounting errors, then finally broke down and admitted that she had been borrowing HOA funds to cover personal expenses after her divorce. "She said she was going to pay it back," Mr. Garcia told me, shaking his head. Like that made it okay. Margaret told her straight up that this was embezzlement and they had no choice but to report it. How much did she take? $37,000 over 2 years. Margaret found payment records for her car, her credit cards, even a vacation to Cancun that was billed as board retreat that no other board members attended. Wow. Yeah, she's done. The vote was unanimous to remove her. Even Wendy voted yes, though she was crying the whole time. The neighborhood exploded with the news. The Facebook group was on fire. People were angry, vindicated, shocked. Some of Patricia's supporters tried to defend her, claiming she was under a lot of stress, that the divorce had been hard on her. But most people were just furious that their HOA dues had been funding someone's personal lifestyle. 2 days later, 2 detectives from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office showed up at Patricia's house. I watched from my window as they spent about an hour inside, then left with several boxes of documents. Patricia's car remained in the driveway. Tom called me that afternoon. "Have you seen the news about Patricia?" "Yeah, the detectives were here." "No, I mean the actual news." Channel 7 just picked up the story. I turned on my TV and found the local news. Sure enough, there was a reporter standing in front of the Pinewood Heights entrance sign, talking about HOA corruption and embezzlement. They had gotten hold of some of the financial records, probably through a public records request, once the police were involved. Local HOA President Patricia Henderson is under investigation for allegedly embezzling nearly $40,000 from the Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association, the reporter said. The scheme was uncovered after a dispute over snow removal led residents to examine the association's financial records. One resident, a military veteran, has filed a lawsuit for harassment that brought these irregularities to light. They did not name me, but they showed footage of the M939 parked in my driveway. My phone started ringing off the hook. Other news stations wanted interviews. A producer from a local morning show wanted me to come on and talk about HOA abuse. Someone from a podcast about neighborhood drama wanted to do a whole episode about Pinewood Heights. I declined most of them. I did agree to a short interview with Channel 7, mostly because I wanted to make a point about HOA overreach and how organizations without proper oversight could spiral out of control. The reporter, a sharp woman named Jessica Chen, who I think might have been related to my neighbor Mrs. Chen, asked good questions. What made you decide to borrow a military snowplow? Honestly, frustration. I'm a veteran, I have resources through my military connections, and I was tired of being fined for trying to help my community. Sometimes you have to make a statement. Did you expect it to lead to uncovering embezzlement? Not at all. I just wanted to clear some driveways. But when my lawyer started documenting the pattern of harassment and selective enforcement, we found a lot of irregularities. Credit goes to the board members who were willing to look at the evidence and take action. What do you think should happen to Mrs. Henderson? That's for the courts to decide. But I think this should be a wake-up call about HOA governance. These organizations have a lot of power over people's homes and lives, and there needs to be transparency and accountability. The interview aired that evening and got picked up regionally. By the next morning, I was getting calls from HOA reform advocates, lawyers from other states dealing with similar issues, and even someone writing a book about HOA abuse who wanted to include our story. Meanwhile, Patricia Henderson had lawyered up and stopped talking to anyone. The rumor mill said she was trying to negotiate some kind of plea deal with the district attorney's office. Her house went up for sale within a week, a clear sign she was planning to get out of Pinewood Heights as fast as possible. The HOA held a special election for a new president. Mr. Garcia won in a landslide, running on a platform of transparency, reasonable enforcement, and actually helping the community instead of policing it. One of his first acts was to formally rescind all of my fines and issue a written apology on behalf of the board. His second act was to hire an independent management company to handle the HOA's finances and ensure nothing like Patricia's embezzlement could happen again. His third act was to revise the noise ordinances to be more reasonable and add exceptions for emergency situations and community assistance. We're a neighborhood, not a police state, he said at the first meeting under his leadership. Rules exist to help people live together peacefully, not to give anyone power trips. The applause was deafening. As for me, I returned the M939 to Jake, though not before taking it on one last cruise through the neighborhood. Kids came out to wave. Adults took pictures. Someone had made a banner that said, "Thank you, Mark," and hung it across their garage. "You're a legend now," Jake said when I dropped off the truck. "My phone has been ringing non-stop with people wanting to rent military vehicles for their own HOA disputes. Please tell me you're joking." "Only partly. I've actually had 3 serious inquiries. One guy in Colorado Springs wants to drive an old Humvee to his HOA meetings just to make a point." I laughed. Start a new business. HOA intimidation vehicles. Don't think I haven't considered it. The legal saga continued for months. Patricia Henderson was eventually charged with felony theft and embezzlement. Her lawyer tried to argue that it was a civil matter, not a criminal one, but the DA's office disagreed. The amount she had taken, combined with her position of trust and the deliberate falsification of records, made it a clear-cut case of criminal activity. She ended up taking a plea deal, 3 years of probation, full restitution of the $37,000 plus interest and penalties, 300 hours of community service, and she was banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado for 10 years. It was not prison time, which some neighbors felt she deserved, but it was still significant. The restitution alone was going to be rough. She had to sell her house to make the first payment, and from what I heard through the grapevine, she moved back east to live with family in Pennsylvania. Wendy Wilson, her main supporter on the board, quietly resigned and moved to Arizona. Richard Stanton stayed on the board but kept a much lower profile. Margaret Foster became the new treasurer and implemented a system of checks and balances that made it nearly impossible for any single person to misuse funds. The whole situation became a case study in HOA reform. The local news did several follow-up stories. Colorado state representatives actually introduced a bill requiring more financial oversight for HOAs, citing Pinewood Heights as an example of what could go wrong. I ended up testifying before a state committee about HOA abuse, which was surreal. Mr. Lawson, would you say that your military background influenced how you approached this situation? One representative asked. Absolutely, I said. In the military, you learn that leadership is about serving the people you're responsible for, not wielding power over them. You learn to question orders that don't make sense, and you learn that sometimes you have to take a stand, even when it's uncomfortable. And the snowplow, I grinned. That was just practical problem solving with available resources. The committee room laughed. Life in Pinewood Heights gradually returned to normal, or rather, a new kind of normal. Mr. Garcia turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He organized neighborhood events that people actually wanted to attend. He mediated disputes fairly. He even got the board to vote to reduce HOA dues by 20% once they realized how much money Patricia had been wasting. The neighborhood Facebook group, which had been a toxic cesspool under Patricia's reign, became actually pleasant. People shared recipes and recommended contractors and organized block parties. Someone started a neighborhood tool library where people could borrow lawn equipment and snow blowers instead of everyone buying their own. Mrs. Chen taught dumpling-making classes in the community center. The Garcia family hosted a monthly potluck with incredible Mexican food. The Johnsons started a neighborhood book club. People knew their neighbors' names again. I kept my regular truck with the snowplow attachment, and nobody gave me grief about it anymore. When the next big storm hit in February, I was back out at 5 in the morning clearing driveways, and this time half a dozen other people joined me with their own equipment. We had the whole neighborhood cleared by 8, and somebody brought coffee and donuts. It felt like an actual community. Tom told me that my case, or rather the non-case since we never had to actually go to trial, was being used as a teaching example in his firm for how HOA disputes could escalate, and what to look for in terms of financial irregularities and harassment patterns. You basically wrote the playbook for fighting back against HOA abuse, he said over beers one evening. I've had 4 new clients come to me specifically because they saw your story and realized they didn't have to just accept being harassed. I just wanted to clear my driveway, I said. Sure. with a 5-ton military vehicle. Well, yeah, go big or go home. The story did not end there, not completely. About 6 months after everything went down, I got a letter in the mail from Patricia Henderson's lawyer. Inside was a check for $200, the amount of that first fine she had issued me for clearing snow too early in the morning. There was a brief note attached. Per the terms of Mrs. Henderson's restitution agreement, all fines that were improperly issued have been returned to affected parties. Please acknowledge receipt of this payment. I stared at the check for a long moment, then I walked down the street to Mr. Garcia's house. "Hey, Mark, what's up?" he said, opening the door. "I just got my fine money back from Patricia. I want to donate it to the Neighborhood Improvement Fund." His face broke into a huge smile. "That's perfect, actually. We're trying to raise money for new playground equipment at the community center. Every bit helps." "Then consider this my contribution." I signed the check over to the HOA and left it with him. It felt like closing a chapter. Spring came to Colorado the way it always does, suddenly, and with the mountains still wearing caps of snow while the valleys burst into green. The neighborhood held a community garage sale in April, and people actually showed up and had fun instead of worrying about whether their tables were the approved height or their signs were too large. I met someone at that garage sale, actually. Her name was Whitney Walsh, and she was looking at the old camping gear I was selling. She had recently moved to Colorado from Minnesota and was trying to get equipped for hiking in the Rockies. "Is this tent actually any good for mountain weather?" she asked, holding up a dome tent I had used exactly once. "It's okay for summer, but if you're going above tree line, you'll want something sturdier. Where are you planning to hike?" We ended up talking for 30 minutes about trails and camping spots. She was a physical therapist at the same VA hospital where I had my appointments. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, laugh lines around her eyes, and the kind of direct way of speaking that I appreciated. "I heard about the whole HOA thing," she said eventually. "The snowplow story." "That was you, guilty as charged. That's kind of amazing. I hate HOAs. Had a terrible experience with one in Minneapolis before I moved." "Yeah, they can be rough, but ours is better now. New leadership." "Because you drove a tank through the neighborhood." "It was not a tank. It was a 5-ton truck with a plow blade. Completely different." She laughed, and I realized I really liked the sound of it. I ended up selling her the tent for half of what I was asking, and also giving her recommendations for a good outdoor gear shop and a map of my favorite hiking trails. She gave me her number and suggested we grab coffee sometime. "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. Mr. Garcia, who had been watching from his driveway where he was also selling stuff, caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up. Life in Pinewood Heights continued to improve. The HOA became something that actually served its purpose, maintaining common areas and organizing community events, without the oppressive enforcement of petty rules. People took pride in the neighborhood again, not because they were afraid of fines, but because they actually cared about their community and neighbors. I went on that coffee date with Whitney, and then another, and then we started hiking together on weekends. By summer, we were dating seriously. She fit into the neighborhood perfectly, joining Mrs. Chen's dumpling classes and helping organize a neighborhood first aid course through her connections at the VA. "Your neighbors are great," she said one evening as we sat on my back patio, watching the sun set over the mountains. "This is what a community should feel like." "It wasn't always like this," I said. "Took a snowplow and a minor act of rebellion to fix it. Sometimes that's what it takes, standing up to bullies. Patricia was not exactly a bully. She was more like someone who got a little power and didn't know what to do with it except use it to control things." That's literally what a bully is, Mark. Fair point. The neighborhood hosted a summer barbecue in July at the community center. Mr. Garcia had organized it as a new Pinewood Heights celebration, marking a year since the whole Patricia situation had imploded. There were burgers and hot dogs and about 15 different side dishes from various families. Kids ran around playing games. Someone set up a volleyball net. Mrs. Chen found me by the dessert table. Mark, I want to thank you again. This neighborhood is happy now. Before, everyone was scared all the time. Now we are friends. It was a team effort, Mrs. Chen. A lot of people stood up. Yes, but you started it with your big army truck, she grinned. My grandson still talks about it. He wants to join the military now because you made it look cool. I laughed. I'm not sure that's exactly the lesson he should take from this. No, it's good. You showed him that veterans help people. That's important. The summer barbecue became an annual tradition. So did a winter snow clearing brigade where everyone with equipment helped everyone else. The neighborhood book club expanded to include a hiking group and a community garden project. Pinewood Heights transformed from a place where people lived in fear of HOA violations to a place where people actually knew and helped each other. Tom came to one of the barbecues, bringing his wife and kids. You know your story is still making rounds in legal circles, right? He said as we grabbed beers from a cooler. Really? Yeah. There was an article in a Colorado Bar Association journal about HOA governance and financial oversight. They used Pinewood Heights as the key example. You're cited as resident, but everyone knows it's you. I'm famous in legal journals. My childhood dream come true. Mock all you want, but you actually changed things. That bill that passed requiring independent financial audits for HOAs over a certain size, that exists because of this situation. I genuinely did not set out to reform HOA law. I just wanted to clear my driveway. Best accidental activism ever. I proposed to Whitney in October, on top of a mountain about an hour west of Denver. We had hiked up to catch the fall colors, and the aspen trees were brilliant gold against the deep blue sky. She said yes before I even finished asking the question. I knew you were going to ask, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. You've been acting weird all week. Was I that obvious? You reorganized your sock drawer. You never do that unless you're nervous about something. We got married the following spring in a small ceremony at the Pinewood Heights Community Center. The entire neighborhood was invited, and most of them came. Mr. Garcia officiated since he had gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Mrs. Chen made approximately 7,000 dumplings. The Garcia family provided a taco bar. The Johnsons brought a sound system and created a playlist. It was perfect. During the reception, people gave toasts. Mr. Garcia told the whole snowplow story, embellishing it to the point where the M939 sounded like it was the size of an actual tank, and I had plowed through snowdrifts that were 20 feet high. Everyone laughed. Whitney squeezed my hand under the table. Your neighbors really love you, she whispered. They love that I pissed off Patricia Henderson, I whispered back. No, they love that you stood up for them. There's a difference. Margaret Foster, still the HOA treasurer, stood up to give a toast. When Mark first joined this neighborhood 5 years ago, Pinewood Heights was a different place. Some might say it was a more orderly place. Laughter rippled through the crowd. But order without justice is just control. What Mark taught us, whether he meant to or not, is that communities work best when people work together, not when they're afraid of each other. So here's to Mark and Whitney, and to the kind of neighborhood where someone can borrow a 5-ton military truck to help their neighbors, and it's considered normal. Everyone raised their glasses. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. Whitney and I bought a bigger house, still in Pinewood Heights, with a yard big enough for the garden she wanted and a garage big enough for my projects. I started teaching a veteran support group at the VA, helping other guys transition to civilian life. Whitney took on more responsibilities at the hospital and started a specialized program for veterans' physical therapy. The neighborhood continued to thrive. Mr. Garcia served 3 terms as HOA president before passing the role to Mrs. Patel, who was equally reasonable and community-focused. The Facebook group hit 500 members and became a model for other neighborhoods. The playground equipment we had fundraised for got installed and was constantly full of kids. Patricia Henderson became a cautionary tale, a story people told about what happens when power goes to someone's head. I sometimes wondered what happened to her, whether she had learned anything from the experience, whether she was doing okay in Pennsylvania. But mostly, I just felt relieved that she was gone and we could all move on. Jake called me up about 2 years after the original snowplow incident. "Hey, remember that M939 you borrowed? How could I forget? I finally sold it. Guy from Wyoming bought it. Guess what he's planning to use it for? Please tell me." His HOA is giving him grief about his driveway. He saw your story online and decided to follow your example. I started laughing. "You're kidding." "Dead serious. He even asked if I could put him in touch with you for advice. I think you started a movement." "A movement of people using military vehicles to fight HOA overreach. Is there a better kind of movement?" I thought about it. "Not really, no." Whitney and I had our first kid 2 years after we got married, a daughter we named Michelle. The neighborhood threw us a baby shower that was ridiculously over the top. Mrs. Chen knitted approximately 40 blankets. The Garcias gave us a handmade crib that Mr. Garcia had built himself. People we barely knew dropped off meals for weeks after we brought Michelle home. "This is what community means," Whitney said one evening as we looked at all the gifts and cards. "People caring about each other." "Yeah," I said, holding our sleeping daughter. "I'm glad we're raising her here." Michelle's first word was snow, which seemed appropriate given the family history. Her second word was plow, which made everyone laugh. By the time she was 3, she could identify different types of snow removal equipment and had strong opinions about which was best. "She's definitely your daughter," Whitney said, watching Michelle explain to another kid at the playground why a plow blade was superior to a snow blower for heavy accumulation. The years passed. The neighborhood continued to function smoothly under reasonable leadership. The laws about HOA oversight that had been partially inspired by our situation seemed to be working, or at least there were fewer horror stories in the news about HOA abuse. I stayed in touch with some of the people who had reached out to me for advice about their own HOA problems, and it was gratifying to hear that many of them had successfully reformed their associations, or at least established better accountability. Tom retired from active law practice and became a consultant specifically for HOA disputes. "I have you to thank for this niche," he told me. "Turns out there's a huge demand for lawyers who understand HOA law and are willing to fight back against abuse. Send me a referral fee," I joked. "I'm serious. You changed the trajectory of my career and probably prevented a lot of people from being harassed by petty tyrants." On the 10th anniversary of the snowplow incident, which had become legendary in neighborhood lore, the Pinewood Heights HOA erected a small plaque at the community center. It read, "In recognition of the events of February 2026, which reminded us that communities thrive on mutual support, not rigid control, may we always remember to help our neighbors and question authority that serves itself rather than the people." It did not mention my name, which I appreciated. It was not really about me anyway. It was about what happened when people decided they had had enough of being pushed around and stood up for each other. The dedication ceremony was well attended. Michelle, now 10 years old, read a short essay she had written for school about community values. Mr. Garcia, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever, gave a speech about the evolution of Pinewood Heights. Mrs. Chen, who had become like a grandmother to half the neighborhood kids, led everyone in a toast. "To good neighbors," she said, raising her glass. "And to the courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult." "To good neighbors," everyone echoed. I stood there with Whitney's hand in mine, Michelle leaning against my side, surrounded by people I genuinely cared about and who cared about me, and thought about how strange life was. A decade ago, I had been angry and frustrated, borrowing a military surplus truck to make a point and clear some driveways. I had not planned to start a neighborhood revolution, or inspire HOA reform, or end up exposing embezzlement. I had just wanted to help people and stand up to someone who was abusing what little power she had. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person deciding they have had enough. One person willing to do something a little crazy to make a point. One person who recognizes that rules are supposed to serve people, not the other way around. And sometimes you need a 5-ton military surplus truck with a plow blade to make that point effectively. As the ceremony wrapped up and people started mingling, eating the food that everyone had brought, I noticed a young couple I did not recognize talking to Mr. Garcia. They looked nervous. He waved me over. "Mark, these are the Thompsons. They just bought the Henderson house." My old nemesis's house. It had changed hands 3 times in the past decade. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, shaking their hands. "We heard about the history," Mrs. Thompson said hesitantly. "The whole HOA situation. We were worried about moving here, but everyone says it's completely different now." "It is," I assured her. "We learned some hard lessons, but we learned them. You picked a good place to live." "We actually read about the whole thing online before we made an offer on the house," Mr. Thompson admitted. "The story about the snowplow and everything, kind of wild." "It was a weird time," I said diplomatically, "but it worked out," Michelle piped up. "Now everyone's nice to each other and we have good rules that make sense." "Out of the mouths of babes," Whitney said, ruffling our daughter's hair. The Thompsons relaxed and ended up staying for the whole event. By the end of the evening, they had been adopted into about 4 different neighborhood groups and had invitations to 3 upcoming events. They left looking relieved and happy. "Another satisfied customer," Mr. Garcia said, watching them go. "You know, Mark, sometimes I think about what this place would have become if you had not done what you did. If you had just paid those fines and kept your head down. Someone else would have stood up eventually. Maybe, or maybe not. Maybe we would all just have gotten used to it, normalized the abuse. That's what happens in a lot of places. People just accept that this is how things are. I had a good lawyer and some military contacts. I was lucky." "You were brave," Mr. Garcia corrected. "Don't sell yourself short." As the sun set and the party wound down, I helped clean up, stacking chairs and collecting trash. Michelle ran around with the other kids, playing some complicated game that seemed to involve a lot of running and shrieking. Whitney chatted with a group of women about organizing a neighborhood yard sale. This was my life now. Community events and playdates and ordinary suburban existence. It was a far cry from my military days, from the adrenaline and danger and constant movement. But it was good. It was real. It mattered. And it all started because I refused to accept that someone could fine me for clearing snow from my own driveway at 5 in the morning during a state of emergency. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes borrowing a military truck is exactly the right response. Sometimes you have to make noise, literally and figuratively, to remind people what actually matters. I looked around at my neighborhood, my community, my home, and felt deeply satisfied. Not because I had won some battle or proved some point, but because this place had become what it should have always been. A place where people helped each other, looked out for each other, and actually enjoyed living near each other. Patricia Henderson's reign of petty tyranny was long over. Her financial crimes had been exposed and punished. The systems that had allowed her to abuse her position had been reformed. And Pinewood Heights had become proof that communities could heal, could change, could become better versions of themselves. All it took was one person willing to stand up, a 5-ton military truck, and a neighborhood full of people ready to support each other once someone showed them it was possible. I walked home that evening with my family, Michelle chattering about the ceremony and already planning what she wanted to write about it for her next school assignment. Whitney walked close beside me, her hand in mine, occasionally laughing at our daughter's enthusiasm. "Good day?" she asked. "Very good day," I confirmed. "Think you'll ever top the snowplow incident? God, I hope not. Once in a lifetime is enough," she laughed. "You say that now, but I know you. If someone needed help and you had access to, I don't know, a bulldozer or a crane or something equally ridiculous." "I would absolutely use it," I admitted. "What's the point of having connections if you don't use them to help people?" That's what I thought. We reached our house, Michelle running ahead to check if there was any mail. The evening was cool and perfect, with stars starting to come out above the mountains. Somewhere down the street, someone was grilling dinner. A dog barked happily. Kids played in a yard, normal suburban sounds, normal suburban life. But built on a foundation of standing up for what was right, even when it meant being a little crazy. Built on the principle that communities work best when people care about each other more than they care about rules. Built on the memory of one winter morning when I decided I had had enough and borrowed a military truck to clear my neighbors' driveways. I would not change any of it. Not the fines, not the confrontations, not the legal battles, not even Patricia Henderson's vindictive attempts to destroy me for daring to challenge her authority. Because all of it led to this: a neighborhood transformed, a community united, a place where people genuinely cared about each other. And sometimes, that's worth fighting for, even if it means driving a 5-ton military surplus truck through the snow at 5 in the morning just to make a point. Especially if it means that.